I wanted to share with you guys my outlook for 2024. This is kind of the way I'm seeing things shape up at this point. And this is the same presentation I gave in the team meeting last week. So, first off, let's focus on where the Fed's mindset is at. And based on their minutes, which were released on January 3rd, they basically acknowledged that inflation, at least in the last 6 months, is much lower than where it was prior to that. The reason that's important is because when you see inflation figures get reported, they're still reported above the Fed's target of 2%. But when you only look at the annualized pace of the most recent 6 months, it's basically at the Fed's target. So the Fed feels comfortable with where inflation is at right now. They did acknowledge that if they keep interest rates too high for too long, there would be collateral damage on the economic side in terms of jobs. And pretty much the entire committee mentioned in the previous meeting that they believe that lower rates will be appropriate for 2024. So I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, but it feels like they are just basically supporting the idea that we should see lower rates in 2024. Now, when you look at the inflation readings, it definitely shows what the Fed referenced. So this is monthly inflation going back the last 13 months. And if you look at 12 to 6 months ago, you can see annualized inflation was about 5%. In the most recent 6 months, it's running at about a 2.8% annualized clip. So again, inflation is cooling. And as we move forward and some of these larger figures run off, that annual inflation number should come in at the Fed's target. Jobs, however, the job market does remain relatively strong. Now, this is good for all of our clients in terms of keeping their jobs, but it's bad because if there was more softness in the labor market, we would see lower mortgage rates today. When Friday's jobs number came out on January 6th, it showed 216,000 new jobs created for the month of December. That was much stronger than analysts had anticipated, and you can see it's even a higher trend than the previous 2 months, October, November. So mortgage rates, you'll notice around that time, mortgage rates kind of stabilized. So mortgage rates had come down pretty significantly from the end of October through the new year. That jobs report hit, and now mortgage rates have kind of stabilized here. So the markets are kind of taking a pause and saying, well, gosh, is the economy really weakening? But if you look at these jobs numbers on a quarterly level, you can see clearly there is a softening. So going back again, first quarter of 2023, nearly 1 million jobs were created. That went down for the second quarter, third quarter, and the most recent quarter was the weakest job growth in some time. So although we are still creating jobs, which means growth, the growth is slowing. And if that trend continues, we will see lower mortgage rates in 2024. What I'm watching every single month is the job openings number. So this is the number of jobs that are available in the U.S. economy. And this number still remains super high. Most analysts are saying we need to see this number make it all the way back down into the $5 to $6 million or $5 and $6 million job range. Currently, we're up nearly 9 million jobs. So there's still a long ways to go in terms of softening before the Fed and the markets are completely convinced that inflation is stamped out, in which case that's when we'll start to see mortgage rates, I think, start with 5. All right, so let's keep moving along here. Right now, if you look at the Fed's probabilities in terms of them cutting rates, the federal funds rate, remembering they don't directly control mortgage rates. Right now, the financial markets think there's about a 1/3 probability that the Fed will leave rates unchanged, meaning that there's a 2/3 probability that the Fed will cut rates by their March meeting. And if they haven't cut rates in their March meeting, right now, the financial markets think there's about a 90% chance that they'll cut at the May meeting. So we expect in the first half of the year, Fed rate cuts seems very, very likely. Again, the Fed doesn't directly control mortgage rates, but this will do a lot because the media will report on this, and this will do a lot for buyer psyche in terms of understanding where interest rates are. Okay, so is a recession coming? I think this is the biggest topic of 2024. Now, if you remember last year, many analysts, many economists had expected that a recession would take place in 2023, but the economy has remained extremely resilient. So one of the ways that we can measure this is looking at the spreads between Treasury bills and notes. So this is a measurement that takes the yield on the 10-year Treasury note and subtracts the yield on the 3-month Treasury bill. And when this number goes negative, in other words, when the yield on the 3-year bill is higher than the 10-year note, it's a very strong indicator that there will be a recession. It happened in the late 80s, early 90s. It happened again in the early 2000s. It happened right before the housing crash and, of course, before COVID. What's interesting about this is, keep in mind, the financial markets didn't necessarily know COVID was coming, but we still had this event and went into recession. Now, look at the severity of how negative this is right now. I don't necessarily believe that this will demonstrate that this is going to be an extremely large recession or impactful recession. What it tells me is the likelihood is very high that we're going to have a recession in the next 12 months. Even by the Fed's own measurement, this is actually off the Fed's website. They're saying there's a 63% chance that we'll see recession in the next 12 months. I think it's probably even higher than that. So what I would prepare yourselves for is the conversations that you're going to have with buyers and sellers, because remember, most of the population was alive and well during the housing crash. And so because our minds are built on survival and avoiding threats, most of our minds' alarms are going to go off when the word recession hits. And I think there's going to be a general misunderstanding amongst buyers and sellers that if a recession is coming or a recession is here, that home prices are going to go down. And so what I am going to be really good about this year is being able to objectively educate consumers on the realities of home prices during recessions, because this is the S&P Case-Shiller Home Price Index for Portland going back 40 years. And you can see during that recession in the early 90s, what happened? Home prices in Portland went up. What about the dot-com bust, early 2000s? During that recession, home prices went up. Now, of course, the exception is the Great Recession, and this is because housing drove the economy into recession. So clearly home prices fell here. And then, of course, if you look at the most recent brief recession around COVID, of course, home prices soared. So in 3 of the last 4 recessions, home prices increased. There was one exception, and of course, that was the Great Housing Recession. And let's look at some of the reasons why this time is not is going to be different from that. When we look at some of the key fundamentals around housing, we can look at jobs, right? So back then, unemployment hit 10%. Right now, the unemployment is 3.6%. This may tick up a little bit in the months to come, but I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to get us to 10%. There's just generally more jobs in the economy today than there were back then. Subprime loans, of course, don't exist today. They were very prevalent back then. Look at new home construction. So looking at the 5 years previous to the housing cycle, the housing industry had built nearly 8 million homes during that time. We're 40% less than that right now. And you look at the current inventory nationwide. Back then, there were 4 million homes on the market for sale. Right now, we have less than 1 million. Mortgage delinquency is basically at all-time lows, so there's no foreclosure wave coming. There's no supply that's going to hit the market that's going to drive prices down. So it's very different right now. We do not expect to see home prices fall if a recession does, in fact, show up. And of course, some of the reasons for that is it's supply and demand. We still have very strong demand fundamentals with regard to millennials, and of course that's our age population. When home ownership goes from 40% at the age of 30 to 60% at the age of 35. So because our largest age cohort is in that age gap right there, we're going to see strong demand for housing for the next few years. This graph does a really nice job of showing the fundamentals of supply and demand. So the blue bar here represents household formations, which is a pretty strong correlation to demand for housing. And of course, the orange or yellow bar here represents the number of new homes that we're completing or building. And so you can see during the Great Housing Crash, look at how much the supply of housing, the completions, outweighed household formations, right? We were building way more houses than were being formed through demographics, and therefore we had more supply than demand. We have incredibly high demand here because of our age demographics, and we're simply just not building enough homes to keep up with that. So with these supply demand fundamentals, it's going to keep home prices firm, potentially even increasing, even if we see a recession. The reality is that years in which home prices decline is actually very, very rare. Going back to 1942, you can see There have been 73 of those years when home prices rise, only 7 years when home prices decline, and 1 year where they remain neutral. So it's basically a 90% batting average on years when home prices are going to increase. Okay, what about interest rates? This is one that, of course, we never know. No one predicted that interest rates would go from roughly 3% to 7% last year. But hey, let's try again, right? So if we look at Fannie Mae's estimates, they're saying that interest rates will make it down to about 6.2% by the end of 2024. I guess this is the end of Q3, I should say. The Mortgage Bankers Association, which of course we have a huge bias for rates to go down, is predicting rates as low as 5.3. The National Association of Realtors, 6%. So if you average them all out, right now, these three entities on average think that rates will be in the high fives by the end of 2024. And I tend to agree with that. I think the first half of this year, we're going to have rates in between about 6.25 and 6.75. It won't be until we start to see those inflation numbers really come down, which should be around April or May. And again, hopefully continued softness in the employment market. I think the second half of this year, we're going to see rates that start with high fives, low sixes. Some of the other storylines that I think we need to be aware of locally. Let's see here. Did I skip? There it is. Here's some of the storylines that I think we need to be aware of. We have an election year this year, right? And it's a presidential election year. And what I've noticed in the past is that starting in September, October, there is a segment of our population that just appears to be enamored by the election and just sits on their hands. We could see some slowness in terms of velocity in the market the second half of this year as a result of the election coming. Keep in mind, locally in the city of Portland and Multnomah County, the city of Portland, we're going to be under charter reform electing 12 commissioners to the city council and a new mayor. And that's going to be with ranked choice voting. Right. So this is a form of voting that we have never done before locally. Frankly, it's going to be a mess. I think we all should just prepare ourselves for the fact that it's going to be a mess. But I also think it's going to add some more confusion and distraction to voters in the voting election. Multnomah County is also going to be electing some new commissioners to its commission, and they're going to have a different form of ranked choice voting. So especially voters in Multnomah County in the city of Portland, it's going to be a problem. Concerning is what's happening at Nike, right? They've already announced on their last earnings call that they've set aside $450 million for severance payments in the first quarter. There's going to be a lot of layoffs at Nike in this first quarter. That means there's likely to be some housing transition. So I would use this as an opportunity to check in with your past clients who have been employed at Nike. Hey, be genuine, right? Let them know you're thinking about them and there to serve them, however we can be of help to them. But staying in contact with those people, I'd imagine there's going to be some stuff that comes out of that. The good news for us, you guys, is that we've already been through our recession. The housing industry went through the recession in the last, roughly 12 months, 18 months. We're going to come out of that this year. There's going to be more business. There's going to be more revenue. So our recession is over. But we're going to have to stay and witness the recession and the rest of the economy probably this year. Thank you so much. Congrats on your move to Living Room Realty. We're super excited for you guys. We know it's a great company, and I'm sure you guys will have tons of success there. Looking forward to being your partner in 2024, and best of luck. See you guys.